And how many years did it take you to become like relatively fluent in Japanese?
So I like to count from when I started going hardcore. I don't really count those first 2 years. And Katsumoto guy who wrote that blog, he had like a quote or something where it's like, you know, it's the difference between, you know, you become a millionaire and when you started you had like $5 in your pocket. You know, it's like so negligible compared to how much I improved after that it's like almost not even worth counting. So like starting from the time I started going really hardcore, I'd say it took about 2 years to reach like a very basic level of fluency, and then 3 years to reach a stronger level of fluency. And then by 5 years, I was at like a point that is kind of comparable to my level now, like maybe like 80-90% of my level now.
And so when you say going hardcore, like what does that mean in terms of your study routine?
So basically, I would probably spend like 5 to 8 hours a day actively doing things in Japanese, and then even more time outside of that just listening to Japanese in the background and stuff. So
it's like a full-time job almost.
Basically, yeah. Like, I mean, that's also my personality is I like to just have one thing I'm into and go really hardcore in it. Like, you know, when I was in middle school, I skateboarded for a couple years. That I took the same approach. Like, if I wasn't skateboarding, I was watching skate videos. You know, that was like all I was doing for a couple years. So that's kind of just my personality. So it kind of meshed well with that. But yeah, I was just watching shows in Japanese, reading books in Japanese, making flashcards to learn Japanese, and when I could, interacting with Japanese people as well.
And so in those, let's say 5 years, how many times did you go to Japan?
Just the 2 times I already told you about. So I had the first 3-week trip, and then I had the 6 months at the study abroad. And when I got back from the study abroad, I still was definitely not fluent in Japanese. I say it wasn't for like another year after that I was really fluent. So I basically got fluent in Japanese in America. And then actually when I got back from that study abroad, I didn't go to Japan for 10 years after that.
Wow. And was it because you kind of had some negative associations with it after your experience?
Not really. Like, I think for me, well, at the beginning, I was really into studying Japanese, the language. And I think I always had it in my head of like, one day I'll go to Japan. But the way I thought about it was that like, being in Japan is not actually a huge advantage when it comes to just learning the language, which is I kind of still feel that way, because for me, what I felt is like the most effective way for me to learn Japanese was when I was actually sitting and like reading books in Japanese and watching shows in Japanese, because then I can pause when I need to, I can look things up, I can make flashcards, I can listen to the same thing on repeat over and over again. And so those are the things that make you improve the most efficiently. Whereas if you're in Japan, you probably don't want to be doing those things. You probably want to be going out and making friends and experiencing the country and having fun, you know, really having an experience. And so I kind of felt like I'll just get good at Japanese here, where I don't have to feel guilty that I'm just, you know, staying in my house and staying in my room all day. And then I'll go to Japan later when I'm already fluent in Japanese. I can just fully experience it without having to, you know, worry about studying, basically.
That's interesting. I mean, it does come with the assumption that you also don't want to do those things like going out and making friends in Portland.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, like I think I'm still a pretty weird guy to this day, but I was already pretty. I mean, for me, I was just a very goal focused guy. Like for me, having this one goal, I'm gonna master Japanese, and then only doing that, like to me, that was bliss. And I didn't really have desire to go out and be an American person. Although when I went to college, so about 3 years into my Japanese learning experience, I transferred to like a normal 4-year university, and they had a lot of Japanese exchange students there. And so I went and hung out with them and made friends with them and, you know, partied with them and stuff like that. So I did kind of have my normal social interactions, you know, there, but it was all in Japanese.
It was all connected to the bigger goal of like learning the language.
Yeah, like in my mind at the time, I had kind of like forsaked my American identity. I was like, my future is in Japan. I'm going to go to Japan. I'm never going to come back. So I don't, you know, anything I invest in my American identity is not going to get me any return, is how I thought. I mean, I don't really think of this way anymore, but back then when I was, you know, around 20, I had a pretty limited mindset, and I was just really stuck on this one thing. Kind of just my personality, I guess.
And I mean, like, okay, the first trip of 3 weeks and then the exchange for 6 months. I mean, that's a decent amount of time. I mean, 6 months is a good stretch to spend in a different country.
Yeah.
But it's not that much time. And so, like, to be fully, like, committed for years of your life to one culture, with limited experience of the actual country. I mean, like, how
Yeah,
do
it's
you
pretty
come to
crazy.
that conclusion? Like, was there anything at the back of your mind saying like, what if I don't like living in Japan?
Yeah, so I did kind of go through a pretty long period of kind of like identity crisis like that. Like it was a couple years. It was around when I was about 5 years in, 4 or 5 years into learning Japanese. I kind of realized that like I don't know. I felt like, well, first of all, I felt like although I had a lot of Japanese friends with these exchange students, still felt like they didn't really think of me as one of their own, right? I still could tell that they thought of me as like a foreigner who was good at Japanese, not just, one of them. And occasionally, they would have like get-togethers where they only invited other Japanese people and they wouldn't invite me. Sometimes they would invite me and invite other foreigners, but sometimes they'd have Japanese only time. And I kind of saw that and kind of felt salty about that. And also, I was just kind of like, I mean, these are kind of a certain type of Japanese person, right? Like a lot of the Japanese people who go to study abroad, they just do it to like kind of mess around for a year and have fun in a foreign country, right? So for me, I'm very serious about mastering this language, and like, I have high aspirations. And these people were like, yeah, I want to learn English, and then they wouldn't study English at all. They'd only hang out with other Japanese people, and I kind of saw that, and I was like, man, you guys are weak sauce, like, come on, like, though you're gonna come here for a year, you're gonna go back home, and you're gonna like, what are you gonna have taken from the experience? Like, you're not taking advantage of this at all. You're only hanging out with other Japanese people and basically doing what you could have done back home. And so I kind of had this experience of like, I don't know, like these Japanese people, like, I don't know, why am I so obsessed with them? Like, they don't really seem that special, like, and I knew intellectually like that there was a huge selection bias there, right? Of like the Japanese people that came to my university were a certain type of Japanese person that were not representative of all Japanese people in the country. But emotionally, it was kind of like the Japanese people I'm hanging out with. It's like, why am I working so hard to learn these people's language? I don't even really relate to them that much. What's so special about them? And I did kind of have this kind of period of crisis. And so, like, yeah, I was actually set to study abroad in Japan again through my university. And it was like I'd already got accepted and everything was going through. And then I kind of had this, sudden change of heart where I was like, actually, I'm done with this. Like, I'm gonna do something else. And I kind of like temporarily kind of quit doing all Japanese stuff for like a year, basically. And so at that point, yeah, I was kind of like, that was when I kind of went through this period of back then I had this mindset of like, Japan is better than America. If I go to Japan, my life's going to be way better. And then I had to kind of come to terms that was kind of all just fantasy that wasn't really based on anything, and that Japan was really just another country. It had its own strengths and weaknesses. But if that was the case, why am I so obsessed with it? Right? And then I eventually, after kind of like a year of taking time away, I kind of came to the conclusion that like Japan was just kind of a part of me by that point. I'd spent so much time that like it wasn't a matter of Japan being better or Japan being good. It was just Japan felt like it was part of me and I missed it. And I kind of realized that like I can like Japan and dedicate myself to Japan without having a real clear reason of why I should do so. And I can just do it because I like it, basically, right? I don't have to justify it to myself or anyone else. And ever since then, I haven't like really looked back. Although it did take me a while to really decide I wanted to move to Japan, though.
But you said that you were looking for like some acceptance from the other Japanese students that you were studying with in the US. Like you wanted to be invited to the parties that they were having just for Japanese people. And I can like really relate to that. Like my language learning experience started with Tagalog, like Filipino. And I had a girlfriend from the Philippines. And so I was kind of thrown into that world through her. And so I wanted to understand what people were talking about. And I wanted to, I wanted to get the jokes. And I didn't want people to have to like translate things for me. I saw a lot of like other like let's say Canadians at Filipino parties, and they never looked like they were having fun. Like they were just off in the corner. They didn't get anything. People would translate jokes to them, but it didn't really work. They missed the punchline. They didn't really connect with the culture. They were just kind of there out of obligation. And I wanted to be like a participant. I didn't want to be a spectator. And so I really threw myself into the language. And I also never learned a language before that. And so I really just like kind of put my head down and just like decided in one moment that I was going to learn the language. And I did that for like 4 years. pretty intensively at times. And I really was looking for acceptance, I think, maybe from my girlfriend at the time, and also just from like the Filipino community. And it just felt like that acceptance was somehow worth more than acceptance from other Canadians, because I was the outsider in that group. It was like, if these people will accept me and I'm not even from there, then I've really achieved something. So like when you were looking for acceptance from Japanese people, were you also looking for acceptance from American people, or was it just kind of like a one way thing?
It was pretty one way at that point. Like at that point, I didn't really care about American people. I was like,
Yeah.
I barely thought of myself as American. In fact, even to this day, like sometimes, like what I find is that because of the life that I've lived, where I have a very limited set of interests. I feel like I'm just describing an autistic person now, but I have like a very limited set of interests that I go really hardcore on. So there's certain things I'm very knowledgeable about. But there's other things that most people know about that I'm not knowledgeable about at all, like sports. I don't know anything about sports at all. And so I feel like with the average American, I don't want to say average. I feel like with Americans, some people that share my interests, I get along really great. And people who don't share my interests, it's like really hard to even have to do what do you call that? Like elevator talk, like chit chat and stuff. Because small talk, that's it. Because there's just so little we have in common. Whereas with Japanese people, I can talk to almost any Japanese person because I've gone out of my way to kind of educate myself on Japanese culture, right? So I know all the most common things that Japanese people talk about, all the most common like music bands and movies and shows and like all the stuff that Japanese people tend to talk about. And because of that, I feel like it's actually in a way easier for me to socialize in Japanese. Now, again, if there's an American person that shares my interests, or like English speaker shares my interests, then it's great. It's no problem. It's even easier than socializing in Japanese. But I kind of feel like because of this odd back of the way I've lived my life for the last like 15 plus years, that to this day I don't. Part of me doesn't even feel all the way American. Like when I go back home and I'm talking to like some average guy on the street, I feel like I'm like pretending that I'm American. And I'm like, is he gonna notice that I'm actually like really weird? And like don't know what's going on, like am I gonna get caught? Like I kind of have this weird feeling.